I died on a Tuesday, choking on the exhaust fumes of a life I never wanted. For 10 years, I bled myself dry to fund my sister's manufactured success, only to be left freezing in a hospital parking lot when my own body gave out. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in a morgue. I was sitting at my family's dining table. The calendar read October 2017. They were about to ask me to throw my future away. Again, the smell of burnt garlic hit me first. It was sharp, acrid, and completely impossible. The last thing I remembered was the sterile chemical stench of the emergency room, the beep of a failing monitor, and the crushing weight in my chest as my lungs finally gave up the ghost. I remember the doctor's mouth moving, but the sound had been drowned out by the ringing in my ears. I remembered being 32, bankrupt, and utterly alone. Now I was staring at a plate of overcooked meatloaf. I blinked. Once, twice. The cheap fluorescent light above the dining table hummed with a familiar, erratic buzz. My hands resting on the chipped formica were unscarred. The deep grease burn I'd gotten working the fryers at 24 was gone. The arthritis that had begun to gnaw at my knuckles was absent. I flexed my fingers. They felt light. They felt young. Hazel, are you even listening to me? The voice was like a physical blow. I looked up. Martha, my mother. She looked exactly as she had 15 years ago. Her hair was still dyed, that harsh, unnatural blonde. Her mouth pinched into the perpetual line of grievance she wore like a badge of honor. Sitting next to her was Richard, my father staring at his plate, avoiding my eyes, just like he always did when things got ugly. And then there was Lily. My younger sister sat across from me, picking at her food with a practiced, delicate grace. She looked up through her eyelashes, wide, pale blue eyes that had always worked like a cheat code on my parents. She was the miracle baby, the one who survived a childhood bout of pneumonia and was forever treated like spun glass. I was just the older sister, the spare, the workhorse. I said, Martha repeated, her voice rising in pitch, "We need to talk about your college applications." A cold wave washed over me, freezing the blood in my veins. I knew this conversation. I had lived this conversation. It was the exact moment my life had derailed. In my previous life, this was the night Martha told me that they couldn't afford to send both of us to college. It was a lie, of course. They could have afforded it if they hadn't spent their entire savings hiring a high-end academic consultant. For Lily, trying to polish a rock into a diamond. Lily's grades were mediocre. Mine were top of the class. I had just received my early acceptance letter to Columbia University. In that past life, I had fought. I had screamed. I had slammed my fists on this very table, demanding to know why my achievements meant nothing. I had packed a bag and stormed out, taking out predatory student loans to survive, only to drop out 2 years later, when Lily inevitably crashed her car, and my parents begged me to help pay her medical bills. I gave them everything. I gave her my future, and when I fell ill 10 years later, they didn't even pick up the phone. Your father and I have been looking at the finances. Martha continued her tone, adopting that faux, sympathetic cadence she used when she was about to ruin your day. And, with Lily's private tutoring for the SATs and Mr. Gable's consulting fees, things are tight, very tight, Richard muttered to his peas. Lily offered a small, pathetic sigh. I feel so terrible. If I wasn't so bad at math... Oh, sweetie, don't say that. You have a different kind of intelligence, a creative soul. Martha cooed, reaching over to pat Lily's hand. She turned her gaze back to me, the warmth vanishing instantly. Hazel, we know you got that acceptance letter, but Columbia is too expensive. Even with the partial scholarship, we need you to decline the spot. There it was, the guillotine dropping. Mr. Gable says that if you decline, it frees up the regional quota. Martha pressed on regurgitating the absolute garbage the scam artist had fed them. It gives Lily a better chance at getting into the same program. You can always go to the community college down the road. They have a lovely nursing program. You've always been so sturdy. You can work and pay your own way. My chest tightened. The phantom pain of a failed heart fluttered behind my ribs. The sheer audacity of it. The casual cruelty. They wanted me to step off a ledge so Lily could have a softer place to land, completely ignoring the fact that Lily couldn't survive at an Ivy League school if her life depended on it. I looked at Martha. I looked at Richard. I looked at Lily, whose eyes held a tiny, barely concealed glint of triumph. In the past, I had detonated. I had burned the bridge. And, because I left in a rage, I lost access to my birth certificate, my tax documents, everything I needed to properly secure financial aid independently. I spent years fighting an uphill battle while they painted me as the ungrateful, hysterical daughter. I took a breath. The air felt real. The linoleum under my feet felt real. This wasn't a hallucination. This was a second chance. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I relaxed my shoulders. I looked my mother dead in the eye, and instead of screaming, I offered a soft, defeated nod. "Okay," I said. The silence that followed was deafening. Martha blinked, her mouth hanging slightly open. She had clearly prepared for a war. She had her counter-arguments, loaded, her guilt trips polished. My immediate surrender short-circuited her brain. "Okay," Richard echoed, looking up from his plate for the first time. "Okay," I repeated, keeping my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You're right. Columbia is expensive, and Lily needs the help more than I do." Lily's triumphant smirk faltered. She looked confused. She liked the drama. She liked being the center of the conflict, the prize, to be won. My apathy took the wind out of her sails. "Well," Martha said, recovering quickly, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. I'm glad you're being mature about this, Hazel. It's for the family. You understand that, right, family comes first." "I understand perfectly," I said. I stood up, taking my plate. "I'll log into the portal tonight and withdraw my application. I'll start looking at the community college tomorrow." I walked to the sink, scraped the cold meatloaf into the trash, and left them, sitting in a stunned, uncomfortable silence. As I walked up the narrow stairs to my bedroom, a slow, cold smile spread across my face. I wasn't going to fight them. Fighting meant they had something I wanted. Fighting meant I cared. I was going to let them put every single egg they had into Lily's basket. I was going to watch them hand over their savings, their credit, their dignity, all for a golden child who couldn't pass a basic algebra test without crying. And when enrollment day came, I was going to be thousands of miles away, watching the fallout from the front row. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., a habit ingrained from years of opening shifts at the diner. I lay in bed for 20 minutes, just staring at the ceiling, mapping out my survival. Withdrawing my Columbia application was painful, but necessary. It was a partial scholarship. My parents would still need to co-sign loans and provide financial information, which they would absolutely refuse to do. I needed a clean break. I needed a full ride. And more importantly, I needed to become a ghost in my own house. I packed my backpack, slipping my birth certificate and social security card from the lockbox in my parents' closet while they were still asleep. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. Without those, I was paralyzed. I tucked them into a waterproof folder at the bottom of my bag. At school, the hallways smelled like floor wax and adolescent anxiety. It was strange being surrounded by teenagers whose biggest problems were prom dates and pop quizzes. I felt like a war veteran walking through a playground. During third period, I slipped out of study hall and walked to the guidance counselor's office. Mr. Harrison was a tired man in his late 50s, buried under mountains of college brochures and unfulfilled dreams. He looked up, adjusting his glasses as I walked in. "Hazel, I didn't have you on my schedule today. I need your help, Mr. Harrison," I said, sitting down in the uncomfortable plastic chair opposite his desk. And I needed to stay completely off the record. He frowned, closing the file he was reading. "Is everything all right at home?" "Everything is exactly as it always is," I said dryly, "which is why I'm here. My parents are pulling all financial support for my college education. They are redirecting everything to my sister." Mr. Harrison's eyebrows shot up. He knew Lily. Everyone knew Lily. She was the girl who cried in the hallway when she got a C- until a teacher bumped it to a B out of sheer exhaustion. "Hazel, you're the valedictorian. You have a 4.0. You're our only Ivy League candidate this year. They can't possibly—" "They can, and they are," I interrupted gently. "I withdrew my Columbia application last night." He looked like I had just slapped him. "You did what?" "It was a partial scholarship. I can't pay the rest, and they won't sign the FAFSA for me. If I fight them, they'll actively sabotage me. So I let them think I've given up. I told them I'm going to community college." Mr. Harrison leaned back, scrubbing a hand over his face. "This is absurd. Let me call your father. I can explain the long-term benefits." "No." My voice was sharp, harder than a 17-year-old's should be. "Do not call them. Do not email them. If you alert them, they will lock down my life. I need to apply for full-ride merit scholarships. The kind that don't look at expected family contribution, or the kind where I can file an emancipation override due to abandonment of support. And I need to apply to schools far away from here. Stanford, U Chicago, MIT. He stared at me for a long time. He was looking for the hysterical teenager, the girl acting out of spite. He didn't find her. He only found cold, hard pragmatism. "You've thought this through," he said quietly. "I have no other choice." Mr. Harrison sighed, opening a drawer and pulling out a fresh notepad. "All right. There are a few national merit programs that bypass parental income if you qualify for an override. We'll need letters from teachers attesting to the situation. Quietly. And we need to get your applications out fast. Thank you. But, Hazel," he paused, looking genuinely concerned. "What are you going to do until graduation? You still have to live in that house." "I'm going to smile," I said. "And I'm going to get a job." That afternoon, I walked into a greasy spoon diner 3 towns over. It was far enough away that my parents' social circle would never see me. It smelled like stale fry oil and cheap coffee, the perfume of my past life. I asked the manager for a job. I told him I needed cash under the table if possible, and I could work closing shifts every day after school. He hired me on the spot. When I got home that evening, the dynamic had already shifted. Mr. Gable, the academic consultant, was sitting in our living room. He was a slick man with a cheap suit and expensive shoes, the kind of guy who preyed on middle-class desperation. He was holding court, drinking my father's good scotch. "It's all about optics," Richard Gable was saying smoothly. "Universities today don't just want grades. They want a narrative. Lily has a beautiful narrative. The survivor, the creative soul. We just need to package it correctly. Now, my premium application package covers essay writing, alumni, networking." "How much?" Richard asked, his voice tight. 10,000, Gable said without blinking. A drop in the bucket compared to her future earning potential. Martha gasped slightly, but Lily just looked at her lap, playing the part of the meek, hopeful child perfectly. I walked into the kitchen intentionally, letting the screen door slam to announce my presence. The conversation in the living room paused. Martha came into the kitchen a moment later, looking flushed. "Where have you been?" she asked, her tone accusatory, though beneath it, I could sense the lingering guilt she was trying to suppress. "I got a job," I said, opening the fridge and grabbing a bottle of water, "at a diner out in Crestview. If I'm paying my own way through community college next year, I need to start saving." Martha blinked. "Oh, a diner." She sounded disappointed, yet relieved. I was conforming to the narrative she had written for me. The sturdy, unexceptional daughter. "Yeah, the tips are okay. I'll be working mostly evenings." "Well," Martha adjusted her cardigan. "That's very responsible of you, Hazel. Hard work builds character. And it keeps you out of the house while Lily works with Mr. Gable. She needs a distraction-free environment." "Of course," I said smoothly. I wouldn't want to get in the way of her narrative. Martha frowned, searching my face for sarcasm, but I kept my expression perfectly blank. She eventually nodded and hurried back to the living room to sign away $10,000 they didn't have. Over the next few months, I perfected the art of disappearance. I woke up, went to school, worked with Mr. Harrison in secret, and then took the bus to the diner. I scrubbed tables, dealt with drunk truckers, and hoarded every single dollar in a secret bank account I had opened under my own name, using a P.O. box for the mail. I watched my family tear themselves apart for Lily. Gable demanded more money for test prep retreats. My parents drained their 401k. The tension in the house grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Richard started drinking more. Martha became hypercritical, snapping at everyone except Lily, who was crumbling under the pressure of maintaining a lie she wasn't smart enough to understand. Lily would come into my room occasionally, usually when she was frustrated by a practice test. She'd lean against my doorframe, watching me fold my cheap diner uniform. "Mr. Gable says, my essay on overcoming childhood illness is guaranteed to get me into Brown," she bragged one Tuesday night in late November. "He says I have the it factor." "That's great, Lily," I said, not looking up from my laundry. She frowned. She hated when I didn't rise to the bait. "Aren't you jealous? Even a little? I mean, you're going to be changing bedpans at the community college, and I'm going to be in the Ivy League." I finally looked up at her. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and she was chewing on her cuticles until they bled. She was a pawn, and she didn't even know it. "I'm not jealous, Lily," I said softly, and I meant it. "I think you're going to get exactly what you deserve." She huffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "You're just bitter." She walked away. I smiled, pulling out a thick, heavy envelope from the bottom of my bag. It had arrived at my P.O. box that afternoon. The return address read Stanford University, Office of Undergraduate Admissions. Winter melted into a miserable muddy spring. By March, the house felt less like a home and more like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. My parents had taken out a second mortgage. I knew this because I accidentally intercepted the mail one afternoon and saw the bank notices. They were bleeding money, funneling it all into the bottomless pit of Mr. Gable's consulting firm. Gable had convinced them that Lily was a shoo-in for early admission to several top-tier schools. He threw around words like legacy connections and donor pipelines, exploiting my parents' absolute ignorance of how modern college admissions actually worked. Lily, for her part, spent her days shopping for expensive winter coats she claimed she would need for the East Coast weather. She skipped school, constantly citing stress-induced migraines. And me, I was the ghost that haunted the periphery. I smelled permanently of old grease and cheap vanilla perfume. I kept my head down. I worked double shifts on the weekends. My bank account was slowly growing a quiet armor. I was forging coin by coin. At school, I maintained my 4.0. The teachers knew what was happening. Mr. Harrison had quietly briefed them, and they treated me with a mixture of awe and pity. I didn't want their pity. I just wanted my transcripts clean. In late April, the acceptance letters were supposed to arrive. This was the period in my past life where things had truly fallen apart. In the previous timeline, this was when Lily's rejections started rolling in, and my parents had turned their fury on me, blaming my negative energy and demanding I take out loans to send her to a private, out-of-state safety school. This time, I was ready. It was a Tuesday evening. I had just gotten home from the diner, my feet throbbing. As I walked into the kitchen, the silence was suffocating. The air was thick with it. Martha was sitting at the dining table. Richard was standing by the window, staring out into the dark. Lily was nowhere to be seen. On the table sat 3 thin, standard-sized envelopes. Not thick packets, thin envelopes, the universal symbol of rejection. I stopped in the doorway, shrugging off my jacket. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice mild. Martha looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, the skin around them puffy and bruised-looking. She looked 10 years older than she had in October. "The letters came," she whispered. Her voice was hollow. "And they waitlisted her. Brown, Cornell, and Yale, all waitlists." She couldn't even say the word rejected. She was clinging to the waitlist like a life raft, ignoring the fact that a waitlist without a massive donor check was effectively a soft no. "What about the other schools?" I asked, walking over to pour myself a glass of tap water. "Mr. Gable says it's just a delay," Richard interjected, turning from the window. His voice was too loud, too desperate. "He says the yield rates are fluctuating. He just needs a little more capital to fly out and speak to the admissions officers in person." I paused the glass halfway to my mouth. More capital? The man was a master grifter, and my parents were his perfect marks. They were too proud to admit they had been conned. "Where is Lily?" I asked. "She's resting." Martha snapped a flash of her old venom returning. "She's devastated, Hazel. The system is rigged against her. All those schools care about are quotas and checkboxes. They don't appreciate true talent." I took a slow sip of water. It tasted like metal. "So what's the plan?" "We're going to pay Mr. Gable," Richard said grimly. "I'm selling the boat. And we're going to need you to start contributing rent. The glass stopped against my lips. I lowered it slowly. Rent, I repeated. You're working 30 hours a week. Martha said, her eyes narrowing as she found a target for her grief and anger. You live here for free. You eat our food. If you're not going to a real college, you need to start pulling your weight. We are fighting for your sister's future. The least you can do is help. In my past life, this was the moment my spirit finally broke. The moment I realized there was no bottom to their demands. They would grind my bones to make bread for Lily and complain that the crust was too tough. I looked at them, really looked at them. I saw two weak, terrified people who had built their entire identity around the illusion of a perfect daughter and were willing to destroy their real daughter to maintain it. The anger flared in my chest, hot and violent, but I forced it down. I smiled, a small, polite, entirely empty smile. Of course, I said. How much do you need? Martha blinked clearly, thrown by my lack of resistance. $500 a month, starting next week. I'll leave it on the counter, I said. I walked out of the kitchen, feeling their eyes burning into my back. Upstairs, I locked my bedroom door. I pulled my backpack onto the bed and unzipped the hidden compartment. I pulled out the thick, heavy packet from Stanford. Inside was the formal offer letter, a full-ride merit scholarship covering tuition, room, and board, plus a stipend for books secured through an independent student waiver Mr. Harrison had helped me fight tooth and nail for. I had also been accepted to MIT and U Chicago, but Stanford was in California, 3,000 miles away from this house. I lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of Martha crying downstairs. They wanted rent. They wanted me to fund the final stage of their delusion. Fine. I would pay the rent for the next month. I would let them drain the last of their resources to send Mr. Gable on a fake business trip. I would let Lily brag to her friends about being waitlisted at Yale. Graduation was in 3 weeks. Enrollment day for the safety schools was 2 weeks after that. I closed my eyes, the exhaustion of the day washing over me. But beneath the fatigue, a bright, dangerous flame was burning. The stage was set. The trap was laid. All I had to do now was wait for the curtain to drop. May arrived with a suffocating humidity that clung to the walls of our house like damp wool. Every Friday, I placed 5 crisp $100 bills on the kitchen counter. I didn't hand the money to Martha or Richard directly. I left it next to the ceramic rooster napkin holder, a silent transactional anchor, weighing down my place in the family. Martha never thanked me. She just made the money disappear before I returned from my shift, replacing it with a lingering smell of cheap lavender aerosol and denial. The house was changing. It felt hollowed out. The first thing to go was Richard's prized Boston Whaler. I came home one Tuesday to find the driveway empty, a rectangular grease stain, the only proof it had ever been there. Richard sat in his recliner that evening, the television off, staring at the blank screen, with a glass of cheap bourbon in his hand. He didn't speak to me. He didn't speak to anyone. He just drank until he fell asleep in the chair, snoring loudly, to drown out the quiet panic setting into his bones. A week later, the good silverware vanished. Then, Martha's diamond anniversary band was quietly replaced by a cubic zirconia fake. She wore gloves when she did the dishes, now ashamed of the cheap metal turning her finger green. They were cannibalizing their own lives to feed the monster they had invited into their home. Mr. Gable came over for what would be the final time in mid-May. I was sitting at the kitchen island, eating a bowl of cold cereal, when he walked in. He looked different. The slick, confident veneer was cracking, replaced by the nervous energy of a man who knew he had bled the stone dry and needed to make his exit. "The landscape is shifting, Richard," Gable said, pacing the living room. His voice was too loud, too fast. "The waitlists at Yale and Brown are practically frozen. It's the legacy admits. They're buying up all the spots. It's corrupt, truly." "You said you had contacts," Richard said. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble I rarely heard. The bourbon was talking. "You said 10,000 would guarantee a spot. We gave you 12. We funded your networking trips to Boston, and I utilized every connection I had." Gable shot back, sweating slightly. "But Lily, well, her test scores, despite our intensive prep, were a significant hurdle. I can't perform miracles if the raw material isn't there." The silence that hit the house was absolute. I stopped chewing my cereal. Did he really just say that? Did the grifter actually drop the mask? Martha gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "How dare you? You said she had the it factor. You said her essay was a disjointed mess about a childhood fever that I had to rewrite 3 times just to make it legible." Gable snapped, grabbing his briefcase. The polite facade was entirely gone. He was cutting his losses. "Look, I have secured her a spot at the State University's regional campus. It's a solid backup. The deposit is due by June 15th. I suggest you pay it. My consulting services are hereby concluded." He didn't wait for a response. He walked to the front door, yanked it open, and practically ran to his leased BMW in the driveway. I slowly took another bite of cereal, the crunch sounding like a gunshot in the quiet house. Martha burst into tears, a loud, ugly, heaving sound. She collapsed onto the sofa, burying her face in the throw pillows. Richard just stood there, his face pale, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. Upstairs, a door slammed. Lily had been listening. I finished my cereal, washed the bowl, and walked past them to head up to my room. "Hazel," Richard choked out as I passed. It was the first time he had spoken my name in weeks. I stopped. I didn't turn around. "Yes. Did you know?" "Know what?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. That it wasn't going to work." I turned my head slightly, just enough to see his broken posture out of the corner of my eye. In my past life, I would have yelled. I would have screamed, "I told you so," until my throat bled. I would have demanded apologies they were incapable of giving. Now, I just felt a profound, exhausting emptiness. "I knew she didn't have the grades, Dad," I said quietly. "Everyone knew. You just chose to pay someone to lie to you about it." I walked upstairs and locked my door. I pulled my Stanford acceptance packet from under my mattress, tracing the embossed gold seal with my thumb. 2 more weeks until graduation. 3 weeks until enrollment day. I just had to hold my breath a little longer. Graduation day broke with a cruel, blistering heat. By 9 a.m., the high school football field was baking the artificial turf, radiating heat waves that made the horizon shimmer. We were lined up in the gymnasium, stuffed into cheap, suffocating blue polyester robes. The air smelled of nervous sweat, strong cologne, and blooming anxiety. I stood at the very front of the line, valedictorian. Behind me, the alphabetical sorting put Lily a few dozen rows back. She was crying. She had been crying for 3 days. The regional campus of the State University was a perfectly fine school, But it wasn't the Ivy League. It wasn't the fantasy. Her friends, who had actually studied and possessed realistic expectations, were comparing dorm layouts at prestigious state schools or private colleges. Lily had nothing to brag about. She was suddenly profoundly average. And to her, that was a fate worse than death. My parents had barely spoken to me that morning. Martha had fussed over Lily's hair, trying to pin a wilted corsage to her robe, whispering frantically that regional campuses are better for networking anyway. Richard had driven us to the school in silence, staring blankly at the road. They didn't buy me flowers. They didn't take a picture of me in my cap and gown. When the band started playing, Pomp and Circumstance, we marched out onto the field. The heat hit me like a physical wall, but I kept my back straight. I walked to the stage, took my seat next to the principal, and looked out over the sea of folding chairs. I found them in the 12th row. Richard was looking at his phone. Martha was fanning herself with a program, leaning over to whisper to another mother. They weren't looking at me. In my first life, their indifference on this day had shattered me. I had sobbed in the bathroom after the ceremony, tearing off my valedictorian medal and throwing it in the trash. I had wanted their pride so badly, I was willing to carve out pieces of my own soul to buy it. Today, looking at them from the stage, I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. They were strangers. They were people I used to know, playing out a tragedy of their own making. And now, Principal Davies boomed into the microphone, I would like to invite our valedictorian Hazel to the podium. A smattering of applause broke out. My fellow students clapped respectfully. Mr. Harrison, sitting in the faculty row, gave me a small, proud nod. I stood up, adjusting the gold stole around my neck, and stepped up to the microphone. The feedback whined for a second before settling. I looked down at the note cards in my hand. I had written a standard boring speech about the future and chasing dreams. I looked up. I looked directly at the 12th row. Martha was finally looking at me, her expression pinched impatient. I put the note cards down. They tell you that high school is about finding out who you are. I started my voice, echoing off the aluminum bleachers. But I think that's a lie. High school isn't about finding yourself. It's about figuring out what you are willing to tolerate. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Principal Davies shifted uncomfortably in his seat. We are taught to sacrifice. I continued my voice, steady carrying over the hot turf. We are taught to put our heads down, do the work, and wait for our turn. We are told that if we are loyal, if we are good, we will be rewarded. But the truth is, loyalty is often just a leash handed to people who will pull it until you choke. I saw Mr. Harrison sit up straighter. He knew exactly what I was doing. Some of us will leave this field today and step into futures that were handed to us. I said, letting my gaze drift over the crowd, finally resting on my sister's tear-stained face in the middle rows. And some of us will leave this field and have to build our futures from the dirt up with our bare hands, because the people who were supposed to help us decided we weren't worth the investment. Total silence descended on the stadium. Even the wind seemed to stop. To those of you who have to build it yourself, don't wait for permission. I said, my voice dropping into a fierce, quiet certainty. Don't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Your life is yours. Walk away from anything that asks you to be less than you are. I grabbed my note cards, stepped back from the microphone, and walked back to my seat. The silence held for 3 agonizing seconds. before the graduating class erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. Teenagers who had spent 4 years suffocating under parental expectations, crushing stress and silent struggles, were standing on their folding chairs, screaming. I sat down. I didn't look at the 12th row again. I didn't need to. After the ceremony, the field turned into a chaotic mess of hugs, tears, and photos. I slipped through the crowd, heading straight for the parking lot. I didn't want to see them. I didn't want to endure the forced, tense car ride home. Hazel. I turned. Mr. Harrison was jogging toward me. His tie loosened his face, red from the heat. He caught up to me, panting slightly. That was quite the speech, he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. I went off script, I admitted. He smiled a genuine warm expression. I noticed. It was exactly what some of them needed to hear. Are you okay? I'm fine, Mr. Harrison. Really? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small rectangular box wrapped in silver paper. He held it out to me. I know things at home are complicated, but I couldn't let my best student leave without something. I took the box. My throat suddenly felt tight. The first genuine crack in my armor. I opened it. Inside was a heavy silver pen, engraved with my initials. For the late nights at Stanford, he said softly. How did you know? I whispered, my voice trembling for the first time in months. I'm a guidance counselor, Hazel. I see the final transcripts. I saw the transfer request. He put a hand on my shoulder. You earned this. Every single bit of it. Don't look back. I won't, I promised, clutching the box. Thank you for everything. I turned and walked away, leaving the high school behind for the second and final time. The fallout from graduation hit the house like a slow-moving landslide. My speech had publicly humiliated Martha and Richard, though no one else in the town knew exactly why. They just knew the valedictorian had delivered a scathing indictment of parental neglect, and Martha's brittle social standing couldn't handle the whispers. They punished me with silence. For 3 weeks, I ceased to exist in their eyes. I didn't mind. I needed the silence to execute the final phase of my escape. June was ending. The deadline to officially enroll and pay the non-refundable deposit for Lily's regional state college was July 1st. It was a few $1,000s, a drop in the bucket for a normal middle-class family, but for my parents, it might as well have been $1 million. The money was gone. Mr. Gable had drained the savings, the 401k was penalized, and tapped out. The boat was sold to pay the second mortgage, and their credit cards were maxed from Lily's Ivy League wardrobe shopping sprees. On June 28th, the panic finally broke through the silence. I came home from the diner at 11 p.m. The lights in the kitchen were blazing. Richard was sitting at the table, surrounded by a sea of paper bank statements, credit card bills, past due notices. He had a calculator in front of him, frantically punching in numbers. He looked sick. His skin was a grayish yellow, and his hands were shaking. Martha was pacing the floor, her hair unkempt, chewing on her thumbnail. We just need a bridge loan. Richard was muttering to himself. Just until I can pick up some overtime at the plant. If I pull from the life insurance, you can't borrow against a term policy, Richard. Martha snapped her voice, shrill and panicked. I called the bank today. They won't extend the credit line. They said our debt-to-income ratio is catastrophic. Don't use that word, Richard growled. It's not catastrophic. It's a cash flow problem. I closed the front door quietly and walked into the kitchen. I set my keys on the counter. The metal clinking made them both jump. They stared at me. It was the first time they had truly looked at me since graduation. "Hazel," Martha said. Her voice changed instantly. The shrill panic vanished, replaced by a soft, pleading tone that made my stomach churn. It was the voice she used when she wanted me to take a double shift so she could buy new curtains. "Hazel, honey, you're home late. We were busy," I said, neutrally. Richard cleared his throat. He pushed the pile of bills to the side, trying to hide the red ink. "Have a seat, Hazel. We need to have a family meeting." I didn't sit. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms over my chest. "I'm tired, Dad. What is it?" Martha wrung her hands together. "It's about Lily. Her deposit for the state school is due in 2 days. If we don't pay it, she loses her spot. She'll have nowhere to go in the fall." "That's unfortunate," I said. "It's more than unfortunate, it's a crisis." Richard said, his voice tightening. He looked at me, a desperate feral glint in his eye. "We are temporarily illiquid. That bastard Gable cleaned us out. We're pursuing legal action, of course, but that takes time." Legal action. What a joke. They had willingly handed over cash envelopes. There was no paper trail. Gable was a ghost. "And what does this have to do with me?" I asked, though I knew exactly what was coming. I had lived this exact conversation before. "You've been working at that diner since November," Martha said, stepping closer to me. "You don't buy anything. You don't go out. You must have a substantial amount saved up." There it was. "You told us you were saving for community college." Richard chimed in, trying to sound authoritative, but failing miserably. "But community college doesn't require a deposit until August, and it's cheap. We need you to float us a loan, Hazel, just to cover Lily's deposit. We'll pay you back before your classes start. We promise." In my previous life, I had given them the money. I had handed over $3,000, every cent I had scrubbed grease and dealt with harassment to earn. I had done it because they begged, because Lily cried, because I believed stupidly that it would finally make them love me. They never paid me back. It forced me to take out my first high-interest student loan, starting the avalanche of debt that eventually ruined me. I looked at Martha's pleading eyes. I looked at Richard's desperate, sweaty face. I felt nothing but a cold, hard granite in my chest. "No." The word hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Martha blinked, stumbling back half a step. "What? What do you mean, no, Hazel? This is your sister's future." "I mean no," I said, pushing off the counter. "I'm not giving you my money." "You selfish little brat!" Richard exploded, slamming his hands on the table. The papers jumped. "We put a roof over your head. We fed you. You owe us? I owe you rent." I shot back my voice, dangerously calm, which I have paid in cash every week for the last 2 months. "I owe you nothing else. She'll lose her spot," Martha screamed, tears finally spilling over. "Do you want her to be a failure? Do you want her to end up working in a greasy diner like you?" "She is a failure," I said. The truth felt incredible on my tongue. "She is a failure because you made her one. You told her she was special when she was just lazy. You paid a con artist to lie to you instead of making her do her homework. You drained your retirement, sold your boat, and ruined your credit for a fantasy. And now you want me to bleed for it? No." "I am your father," Richard roared, stepping toward me, his face purple with rage. "You will go to the bank tomorrow, and you will withdraw that money. Or so, help me God." "Or what?" I interrupted, standing my ground. I didn't flinch. I was 32 years old inside a teenager's body. I had died once. A pathetic, broke, angry man didn't scare me. You'll kick me out. Go ahead. I leave in 3 days anyway. That stopped them dead. Richard froze. Martha stopped crying, her mouth hanging open. Leave, Martha whispered. Leave to go where community college doesn't start until September. I looked at the clock on the stove. It was almost midnight. Enrollment day for my school is July 1st. I said softly, the victory finally blooming in my chest. I have a flight to San Francisco at 6 a.m. on Wednesday. I suggest you figure out Lily's deposit before then. Because once I walk out that door, you will never see a single dime from me again. I didn't wait for their reaction. I walked upstairs, leaving them trapped in the wreckage of their own lives. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. My announcement didn't trigger an immediate explosion. Instead, it sucked all the oxygen out of the house. Martha and Richard had spent 10 years operating under the absolute certainty that I was a fixed point in their universe, a load-bearing wall. They could punch holes in me, hang their burdens on me, and expect me to stand firm. Realizing that the wall was not only moving, but was already halfway out the door, paralyzed them. They didn't ask me about San Francisco. They didn't ask what school I was talking about. Their brains simply refused to process the information. It was easier to pretend I had lost my mind than to face the reality of their own ruin. I spent Tuesday packing. It didn't take long. I had bought 2 large, cheap duffel bags from a discount store. I packed my clothes, my few books, in the waterproof folder containing my vital documents. I left everything else. The posters on the wall, the cheap particle board desk, the bed I had slept in since I was 8. I was shedding this skin completely. At 2 in the afternoon, my bedroom door opened without a knock. Lily stood in the frame. She looked awful. The manufactured glow she had maintained all year was gone. Her hair was greasy at the roots, and she was wearing a pair of sweatpants that looked like they hadn't been washed in a week. She stared at the 2 duffel bags sitting on my stripped mattress. "Mom says you're trying to punish us," Lily said. Her voice was scratchy, lacking its usual performative sweetness. I kept folding a stack of diner t-shirts, tossing them into the trash can. I wouldn't need them anymore. Mom says a lot of things. Most of them aren't true. She said, "You're running away because you're jealous." Lily stepped into the room, her arms crossed tight over her chest. "Because I got into the state school, and you're just going to be a waitress." I stopped. I turned around and looked at her. In my past life, I hated Lily. I hated her with a hot, venomous passion that ate away at my stomach lining. I blamed her for taking everything from me. But looking at her, now stripped of Mr. Gable's false promises and my parents' delusional funding, I just saw a profoundly incapable girl staring down the barrel of a mediocre life she was completely unequipped to handle. I reached into my backpack, unzipped the front pocket, and pulled out the thick, glossy folder. I tossed it onto the bare mattress next to her. "What is this?" she muttered, picking it up. "Open it." She opened the flap. The gold-embossed seal of Stanford University caught the afternoon light. Her eyes scanned the first page, the formal offer of admission. Then she flipped to the second page, the financial aid breakdown, the full ride merit scholarship, the housing assignment. Lily's breath hitched. She read it again. Her lips moved slightly, tracing the words, searching for the catch, the joke, the mistake. This is, she swallowed hard, "This is fake. You made this. It's real, Lily." I deferred my enrollment slightly to sort out the independent student paperwork. "I fly out tomorrow morning for summer orientation." The folder slipped out of her hands, landing on the floor with a soft slap. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. I watched the realization hit her in real time. She wasn't the smart one. She wasn't the special one. She was the anchor that had dragged our parents to the bottom of the ocean, and I was the one walking on water. "You let them pay, Mr. Gable," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You knew he was a fake. You watched them sell the boat. You watched them drain their retirement. You just sat there. They wanted to pay him." I corrected her, keeping my voice utterly devoid of emotion. "They wanted the fantasy. I just got out of the way so they could have it. But my deposit—" Lily stammered, the panic finally breaking through her denial. Tears welled up in her pale blue eyes. "If they don't pay it by tomorrow, I don't go to college. I have nothing." "Then you better hope Dad gets that bridge loan," I said. I picked up the Stanford folder, slipped it back into my bag, and zipped it shut. "Or you better start looking for a job. The diner is hiring." "I just quit." Lily stared at me, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She didn't scream. She didn't throw a tantrum. She just turned around and walked out of the room, her footsteps heavy and dragging like she was walking to the gallows. I closed my bedroom door. I laid down on the bare box spring, listening to the muffled sounds of the house. The low, frantic hum of Richard on the phone downstairs, begging a loan officer. The rhythmic pacing of Martha in the kitchen. Tomorrow was July 1st. Tomorrow was enrollment day. I set my alarm for 4 a.m., closed my eyes, and slept better than I had in a decade. My alarm went off with a sharp beep in the pitch black. I didn't hit snooze. I was up instantly. I dressed in dark jeans and a plain black t-shirt, laced up my boots, and hoisted the 2 duffel bags over my shoulders. They were heavy, but my younger back didn't ache. My chest didn't rattle with the phantom fluid that had drowned me in my past life. I was breathing clear, cold air. I walked down the narrow stairs. The wooden steps creaked loud in the early morning silence. The living room was dark, illuminated only by the harsh yellow glow of the street lamp filtering through the blinds. But the kitchen light was on. I walked toward the front door, planning to slip out before the sun came up. My Uber was 3 minutes away. "You're actually leaving." The voice came from the kitchen archway. I paused my hand on the brass doorknob. Martha stood there. She was wearing the same clothes she had on yesterday. She hadn't slept. Her makeup was smeared under her eyes, deep black smudges that made her look like a hollowed-out skull. In her hands, she held a stack of paper. Final notices, denials, the physical proof of their bankruptcy. "My car is pulling up," I said softly. She stepped into the living room. She looked small. The biting, arrogant woman who had demanded my obedience for 18 years had vanished, replaced by a terrified, cornered animal. "The bank said no," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They said we're a liability. Your father called everyone, his brother, his old boss. No one will lend us the money." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Hazel, please." Martha took another step. Her hands were shaking. The papers rustled loudly. "It's $3,000. You have it. I know you have it. If you walk out that door, Lily's life is over. Our lives are over. Your lives were over the day you decided my future was disposable," I said. I didn't yell. There was no anger left in me. The rage that had fueled me through the winter and spring had burned itself out, leaving only a cold, hard clarity. "We're your family," Martha cried out, the desperation finally breaking her voice. "We raised you. We loved you. You loved the idea of a workhorse." I corrected her calmly. "You loved having someone to absorb the shock of your bad decisions. You wanted me to drown so Lily could float, but I learned how to swim." Headlights swept across the living room window. The Uber was here. At the sound of Martha's cry, heavy footsteps pounded on the floorboards above. Richard was coming down the stairs. He appeared on the landing, his hair a mess, his eyes bloodshot and wild. He saw me standing by the door with my bags. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded, his voice thick with sleep and residual panic. He started down the remaining stairs, his fists clenched. "You put those bags down right now. You are not leaving this house until you help your mother and sister." He was trying to use his physical size, his authority as the patriarch, to bully me into submission. It had worked 1,000 times before. I looked at him. I saw the weak, pathetic man who had let a grifter in a cheap suit steal his daughter's college fund because he was too insecure to admit he didn't know how the world worked. I opened the front door. The cool, humid July air washed over my face. It smelled like wet asphalt and freedom. "I'm going to Stanford," I said, looking Richard dead in the eye. "On a full ride, and you are going to lose this house." Richard froze on the bottom step. The color drained from his face so fast, I thought he might pass out. "Stanford," he mouthed the word, completely foreign to him. "There's cash on the counter," I said, turning back to Martha. $50. It's my last week of rent. Use it to buy groceries. You're going to need them." "Hazel!" Martha screamed, lunging forward. I stepped backward out the door, pulling it shut behind me. The heavy wood slammed with a definitive, violent crack, cutting off her scream. I walked down the driveway. I didn't look back. I opened the trunk of the idling sedan, threw my bags inside, and climbed into the back seat. "Airport?" the driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. "Yeah," I said, sinking into the cheap leather upholstery. "Take the highway." As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked out the window. The house looked exactly the same as it had my entire life. The peeling paint on the porch, the dead patch of grass near the mailbox, the empty driveway where the boat used to be. But the gravitational pull was gone. The invisible chains that had bound me to that patch of dirt were snapped. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I took the SIM card, rolled down the window, and flicked the tiny piece of plastic into the dark street. The ghost was finally dead. I was alive. San Francisco smelled like salt water, expensive coffee, and eucalyptus. The transition wasn't entirely smooth. I was a diner waitress from a dying town, thrust into a campus filled with tech heirs, prodigies, and kids who had never scrubbed a toilet in their lives. But I had an advantage they didn't. I had died once. I knew exactly what failure tasted like, and I knew how to survive it. I treated college like a 40-hour work week. I sat in the front row of every lecture. I went to office hours. I didn't join sororities or party on the weekends. I double majored in economics and computer science, using the brutal, pragmatic work ethic I had forged in the grease and grime of my past life to bulldoze through the coursework. I never answered a single email from the old accounts. I didn't look up my parents on social media. I kept the door nailed shut. But the world is a small place, and closure has a funny way of finding you. It was late October of my junior year. I was 21 years old, sitting in a campus cafe, nursing a cold brew, and reviewing a financial model for my internship at a venture capital firm. My life was quiet, stable, and entirely my own. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Mr. Harrison. We had kept in touch sporadically. He liked to check in, ensuring his star success story hadn't burned out. I opened the email expecting a question about my midterms or a polite update on his impending retirement. Instead, there was just a short note and a link to a local newspaper article. Thought you should know the email read. You don't have to reply. Just wanted to close the loop for you. Proud of you, Hazel. I clicked the link. It was a small local human interest piece in my hometown's digital paper. The headline read, "Local Family Evicted Amid Rising Foreclosure Rates." There was a photo attached. It was the front of the house. The peeling paint was worse now. The lawn was overgrown with weeds, but it was the people standing on the sidewalk that made my breath catch. Martha and Richard were standing next to a pile of cheap furniture, covered by a blue plastic tarp. Richard looked like he had aged 20 years. His hair was completely white, his posture stooped and defeated. Martha was looking away from the camera, her face drawn her designer knockoff clothes, hanging loosely on her gaunt frame. The article detailed how the family had fallen victim to a college consulting scam, draining their assets, leading to a cascade of debt, a second mortgage default, and eventually the loss of their home. The reporter noted it as a cautionary tale of parental ambition gone wrong. I scrolled down. There was one more paragraph. The couple's youngest daughter, Lily, 20, was also present. After missing enrollment deadlines for regional universities, she attended the local community college, briefly, before dropping out. She currently works at a local diner. I stared at the screen. The diner, the universe, had a vicious, poetic sense of humor. They had taken my life in the past timeline, forcing me to serve coffee and scrub floors until my body gave out all to fund their delusions. Now, the wheel had turned. The weight of their own choices had crushed them, slotting them perfectly into the very hell they had designed for me. Lily was working my old shifts. Lily was wearing my old uniform. Lily was dealing with the drunk truckers and the stinging smell of cheap fry oil, while her parents lived out of rented rooms or whatever shelter they could afford, drowning in the debt they had incurred, chasing a ghost. I didn't feel a rush of triumphant joy. I didn't laugh. I just felt a profound, settling peace. The ledger was balanced. The debt was paid in full, not by me, but by consequence. I closed the laptop. Outside the cafe window, the California sun was shining bright and relentlessly warm. Students were walking across the quad, laughing, arguing, moving forward. I looked down at my hands. They were smooth. The arthritis was gone. The burns were gone. I took a deep breath, feeling my lungs expand, strong and unbroken. They say rebirth is a miracle, a magical second chance handed down by the universe. But it's not. Rebirth is just the brutal, agonizing process of refusing to die the same way twice. It is the choice to look at the people holding the knife and stepping out of their reach. I packed my laptop into my bag, threw my empty coffee cup in the trash, and walked out into the sun. I had an internship to get to. I had a life to build. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, it belonged entirely to me. That's the end of Hazel's journey. A second chance, built on the cold, hard choice to finally walk away. Sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back. It's stepping aside and letting the people who used you trip over their own lies. What did you think of Hazel's ultimate escape? Did her family get exactly what they deserved? Or is the universe's sense of irony just a little too brutal? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of satisfying karma kept you hooked, hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good payback story, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss an upload. Protect your peace, and I'll see you in the next one.